Have you ever heard of the Balkan Egyptians? They have an office in Ohrid, culture centers and clubs in multiple countries, and several political parties. But who are they? By the way, this is Arben Demirovski Beno, the president of the Balkan Egyptian Club in Ohrid. These Egyptians didn't just move here. They're the children of a pharaoh's expedition sent north in search of metal. So what would you say the origins of the Balkan Egyptians are?
Yes, the Balkan Egyptians are believed to have arrived in the Balkans around the 13th century BCE, possibly as iron ore miners and metal workers. Various archaeological cities suggest a historical connection to the Egyptian influence in the region.
So that's his father?
This is father from Ramos, Mr. Ramos.
A vibrant blacksmithing culture still exists today, especially in the southern Balkans. You're looking at Ramiz Seydai, now a famous Balkan Egyptian blacksmith in the town of Ohrid. To visit his workshop, by the way, park at the intersection of Ilindenska and Goce Delchev and walk towards the town center. He'll be on your left, where he's worked for decades.
Yeah.
So you said that was him from 1969?
Yes, from 69.
And the same shop.
So my grandfather, he was a blacksmith during, for example, before the Second World War, and after that until 1960s. But when 1960s started the industrialization, the blacksmith profession was abounded. And I do not remember very well when I remember him when he worked it, but I don't remember that he also had a lot of passion as a farmer, agricultural farmer. Also, it's very important profession for Egyptian, who was also the musician, blacksmith and musician. And in the documentary, they're saying 6 days they are hitting the anvil, and the 7 days they're hitting the drum.
The Balkan Egyptians have been accused of being Albanized Roma. Some claim their self-identification is a recent trend made to distance themselves from the Roma and navigate a complex political landscape. However, enough historical evidence exists to suggest there may be some truth to their claims of descent from ancient Egypt. Not only did they organize decades before the breakup of Yugoslavia, but even the Ottomans and Byzantines made distinctions between the Egyptians and the Roma people. In the case of the Byzantines, their existence was acknowledged centuries before the Roma ever arrived in the region. Today you'll be hearing from Orhan Demirovski, a leader of the Egyptian folk groups in Ohrid, the Egyptian Ensemble, and the football team Pyramida. Ruben Zeman, who received his PhD from the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, now serving as a director of the Center for Advanced Researches, formerly a Macedonian member of parliament. Professor Zeman's father founded the Union of Egyptians in Yugoslavia, and Ruben now leads the successor group, the Union of Balkan Egyptians. Finally, we'll speak to Lendrit Celi, who just received his doctorate in Sofia. He founded and leads Prosperiteti Channel and heads the local municipality office for communities and return. Let's start this story by discussing the modern Egyptian identity, working our way back to their origins in the shadowy past. In 1995, Dusko Doder was based in Macedonia, where he wrote that they were seen as, quote, exotic and non-threatening, and because of this, quote, the Egyptians are exempted from prejudices most common against Gypsies and Albanians. Dusko included statements made by Nazmi Arifi showing that he'd campaigned for recognition of their minority status since the mid-1970s. Remember, Arifi is the father of Professor Zeman, the current leader of the Union of Balkan Egyptians.
Scholar Ruben Zeman has analyzed these connections, arguing that Balkan Egyptians have maintained distinct cultural traits while integrating into local societies. The conclusion is the presence of Egyptian-linked archaeological sites suggests a long and complex history of Balkan Egyptians, requiring further research to fully uncover their origins and influence.
The New York Times profiled Arifi in late 1990, reporting 13,000 people had joined his Yugoslav Egyptians Association in the first few months after its creation, proof that a cultural movement was already underway at that time. According to Arifi, quote, "The Egyptians Association has no political goals. We only want to be recognized as Egyptians in the Yugoslav census." He goes on, quote, "We declared ourselves to be Egyptians on the 1981 census, but the government threw us into the miscellaneous category." Indeed, the 1974 Yugoslav constitution established the right of citizens to declare their own ethnic identity. In the census of 1981, many identified as Egyptians, but were reclassified as unknown.
The census 1981, it was for the first time the people to declare like Egyptians. And that was the first, struggles of people to Nazmi Arifi, Usni Zemovski, Demir Kamberi. There are some intellectuals from that time. They organized this activism, citizenized activism. But this, evidenting of as an Egyptian was not recognized by the state because it was not a codex, specific codex when they published the results.
There was a push across Yugoslavia to have an Egyptian category, and in 1991 Belgrade allowed for this. Although it was never officially completed, the data indicates around 13,000 Egyptians in Kosovo and over 3,300 in Macedonia. The breakup of Yugoslavia complicated international awareness of the Egyptians a good deal. Preceding this were the 1981 student protests in Pristina. Albanian students were pitted against mostly Serbian police, and it quickly turned bloody. When the census was taken that year, many Egyptians exercised their right to self-identify. This was the perfect time to do so. Although they spoke the Albanian language, they weren't Albanians and wanted to show a distinction in a politically neutral way by not signing themselves as Serbian. 10 nationalities were listed in the 1981 census, but none of them were Egyptian. The other category numbered over 250,000. Egyptians asking to be recognized were, like Arifi says, thrown into this miscellaneous pile. The refusal to identify as Albanian further upset many activists in an increasingly sensitive political environment. At the same time, Egyptian culture clubs became more known abroad. The largest was the aforementioned Organization of Egyptians in Yugoslavia, led by President Nazmi Arifi. Throughout 1991, independent groups were created in Serbia, Kosovo, and Macedonia. In mid-1992, similar parties and clubs were founded in Albania. By 1995, organization President Arifi told reporters that he estimated their population at around 30,000 in Macedonia, 200,000 in Kosovo, and 400,000 in Albania.
Okay, I'm not believing at all the official statistic here. Everywhere it's a manipulation. Maybe it's not a manipulation, but nobody is observing the process. Because we are observing, for example, the elections from the beginning of the process, from the candidation until to the publishing of the results. But no one is observing the process of registration. But if you're now comparing, for example, Ohrid, we have these membership cards of Egyptians for 4,000, only for Ohrid, and they are publishing the results of 1,500 Egyptians.
About how many Egyptians are living here in Ohrid today?
In Ohrid today, we live about 4,000 Egyptians live here for the moment. 7,000 total, including those living abroad.
Or the World Bank is saying that in Albania they gave aid to 300,000 Egyptians. Okay, they are saying that in Albania living 7,000 Egyptians.
Nazmi Arifi believed there were 1 million plus Egyptians.
We said in the first Congress of the Balkan Egyptians that in the Balkans generally are around 1 million. Because of Albania, we said it's around 300,000 to 400,000.
The war forced many Egyptians from their homes, and discrimination took on new tones. In Kosovo, Albanians accused Milosevic of counting them on the census only to lower their own numbers, and during the Kosovo War, many Egyptian homes were firebombed and adjacent settlements were destroyed in a wave of anti-Roma violence. Egyptians tried to express neutrality in a conflict where it was unacceptable to be neutral.
And why I said this political interfere, because during the 1999, when it was time of the war in Kosovo, somebody from Egyptian communities in that time, it was represented in Rambouillet with the name of Egyptians. Then the effect of that meeting after the war, it was a little bit endangering for these communities especially, because from the Majorans communities they classified them like cooperator with the Serbian's governments. Then somebody from the Ashkali communities who they used that name of nationality, if I need to call in them part where they live it, just like a local name, they started to promote it just to be divided and to save them communities between Albanian communities, to say that we are not same like Egyptians.
Yes, Karim Abazi.
Yes.
He was a representative of the Egyptians at the peace conference for Kosovo.
In Rambouillet, yeah.
I'm wondering what he did.
First, the Egyptians were not included in these negotiations for a solution of the Kosovo when the Serbian government, when still Kosovo was under the, say, Serbian authority. In this negotiation, the Egyptians were not included. And actually, the Association of Egyptians from Kosovo asked to be part of the negotiation. And this, I think, Markovic, he was the chair of the negotiation team. Actually, he included the Egyptian on the request of the Egyptian, not because of the construction of the Serbs. And when he went to Rambouillet, we have his declarations in the media, because there were not a direct negotiation. He said, we are Egyptians and we are living in Kosovo too. The world have to be aware that in Kosovo are living Egyptians. And he said, Kosovo is not Albanians, Kosovo is not the Serbians, Kosovo is of the Kosovo citizens.
Did they feel frustrated at all that NATO and OSCE were looking at them just as though they were Serbs?
He was. He died as a, and because of all of this, how to say, circumstances, he was considered from the Albanians as a spy or anti-Albanian. But he in any declaration he didn't say nothing against Albanians or against Serbia. He just protected the identity of Egyptian. But his house was fired. His villages and his village and where the Egyptians lived were totally fired. I have some pictures. We always said the position, okay, if you have any individual who killed the civilians, accuse the individual, not the collective. It's not possible to have collective blame. Huh?
Do you know what village Abazi? Obilic?
Yes. Subotic and Obilic.
And we're coming up now on the community of Obilic. By 1998, most of these organizations were united at a congress in Ohrid. This was the origin of the Balkan Union of Egyptians.
Our union was much more union for affirming the identity, protection of the culture and cultural heritage, promoting the culture and cultural heritage, and protecting of the minority rights.
Egyptian representatives from Kosovo sat the conference out, fearing participation might provoke anger from their fellow countrymen. When most of the dust had settled and a new international administration was established in Pristina, there was some confusion over the Egyptian identity.
Egyptians and Roma and later the Ashkalis were put in one very delicate position. Their houses were burned, leaders of the Egyptians from Kosovo were evicted. It was a very hard period Of course, from other side, we succeeded with the Balkan Egyptian this question of minority protections to be internationalized, to make an international discussion international level, let's say better. So we succeed to put the position of the Egyptian in Albania, especially in reports of the State Department for Human Rights. I think almost every year from that time is always mentioning that discrimination. The World Bank was also started to interest in for more project about social inclusion of the Egyptians. Then in the Council of Europe, especially the framework conventions, Convention for Protection of National Minorities, and the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance.
They're doing a lot better than we do in the schools, aren't they? $2 million to develop sustainable recycling models to increase socioeconomic cohesion among marginalized communities in Kosovo and Eskali and in Egypt.
A study in 2001 presented in Sofia summarizes the community's plight, explaining that KFOR, the UNHCR, and OSCE, along with most non-governmental organizations, were totally unacquainted with these peoples, and I'm quoting the authors here, quote, "They rapidly declared these new communities, and especially Egyptians, to be an artificial creation of Slobodan Milosevic, and later on, mention of these communities disappeared from most reports and documents."
The Albanians in Kosovo, they use also the Egyptians and Ashkali, because they're speaking the Albanian language, as a part of the Albanian community. This, how to say, identification of the identity was undertaken as an act against the Albanians and pro-Milosevic. We have some Albanian scholars saying that you are pro-Milosevic, you are pro-Serb, and so on.
And when they wanted to mention the three communities, they mentioned Rai. But after one period, the people, especially migrants in Kosovo, which they don't have many informations for that three communities, as I mentioned before. For example, in every kind of text in Kosovo, which our children learn in schools, they don't have any part who can have information about non-majorities communities. They just put it Rai. And the people mean that three of them, Roma, Ashkali, Egyptians communities, they are same communities, put it with the name, only with the one name. I mentions it's same like in Kosovo. You want to speak for Turkish, Bosniak, Goran, and Serbian, and to call them Turbogo.
Should the Rai category be done away with? Should they recognize each of the three individually?
In the constitution, they recognize, so they are separate. The international community, actually not NATO, but UNIC administration started to use this acronym RIA, Roma, Ashkali, and Egyptian, which is, for me, racistic stereotypizing of three communities. So in the Constitution we have three different communities, not only in Constitution, but in reality, we have to respect the identity of each community, so of every person and every community.
What are some of the instances of discrimination you've seen?
For the moment, in the before 10 years, we have a very big problem with discrimination. But after 2013, we have created the community, community in Ohrid. We have association of the Egyptian pyramid Ohrid.
How is possible that Milosevic to create in Albania 300,000 or 400,000 Egyptians? If he created in Kosovo, how is possible in Albania to create Milosevic?
Further explaining the rift between all parties involved, representatives of the Romani people vehemently opposed the Balkan Egyptian identity, claiming they only wanted to distance themselves from the Roma nation, and some Egyptians insist that other groups of self-identified people, such as the Ashkali, are in fact pure Egyptian. Was the decision in the Ashkali community to identify as a different ethnic group, did that involve any politics at all, or was it?
Yes, I think yes. Always I give that declaration from a corner of my view, because I see the situations, there is not any proof that can guarantee you that there is any change between the two communities or difference.
Up to now, so how many? Almost 2 decades, almost 2.5 decades. I didn't saw any serious scholar article or a book about the ethnogenesis, about the history, about the, how to say, archaeology or something about Ashkali community and identity.
There is 3 places where Ashkali communities said that they are from. First of all, from old Persia, which is today Iran. The second one is one village in somewhere in Israel, and also one part of city somewhere in Turkey. So this make me a little bit surprised and weird, because one communities cannot have him origin in 3 part of different country, which is completely different.
Legends about the Persian king Hashkan, but where is the relation between Hashkan and Balkans and Kosovo? You have to make the relation with historical proofs, with archaeological proofs.
But Egyptian communities exist poorly not only in Kosovo. They live also in Macedonia. They live also in Montenegro, in Serbia, in Albania. They live also in Bulgaria. So this is very important to know that Ashkali communities don't exist in Albania. They don't exist in North Macedonia or in that another part of country that I mentioned before. From my corner of view, I should say that Kosovo Egyptian and Kosovo Ashkali, they are the same communities. They are divided from the same nationality, I think, with the interview of the political issues. But Constitution of Kosovo recognized them as 2 communities different from each other. But in moral way, in traditional way, we know that 2 of that communities are same. They have a good cooperation with each other, but in the parliament of Kosovo they are divided, which I hope so in the future they will find one way to be together. But the difference between Roma communities is, let me say, very big, because first of all, the Roma communities in Kosovo, they are linguistic communities. They have their own languages. They have a different traditional things, symbols, flag, communities, everything which is connected with that between Roma and Ashkali Egyptian communities are the problems that they are facing on social conditions, nothing more.
Meanwhile, Ashkali representatives claim that the Egyptians are trying to assimilate them into Albanian-speaking Egyptian culture. Kosovo now recognizes Egyptians and Ashkali as minority groups, unlike surrounding countries. But what is their more ancient history? Although a notoriously unreliable narrator, Herodotus literally created the historical genre. In the 5th century BCE, he set out to chronicle the history of Egypt by collecting an account of the priests. They told him that an ancient pharaoh named Sesostris led an expedition to modern-day Anatolia. Encountering resistance, his army fought to push further west, defeating the Scythians and Thracians. He retraced his steps back, leaving settlers on the western coast of what's now Georgia, along the river Rioni on the Black Sea. Herodotus warns his own readers that the tale was passed down for ages, but even at that time there was a common belief that the Colchians were Egyptians. He also vaguely mentions he didn't know what became of the African colonists, but that some of the pharaoh's army might have broken off and settled elsewhere. What truly became of these settlers is unknown, but folk historians suggest that they settled in the Balkans as the ancestors of the modern-day Balkan Egyptians.
Scientifically, it was very hard to locate the time and place from where colonies from the Egypt immigrated in the Balkans. But of course we have a lot of archaeological findings giving to us indications that the community from Egypt here existed from the very ancient time. For example, Herodotus, he wrote about Pharaoh Sesostrit, who actually, two variations, who was the Pharaoh Sesostrit. One is from the third Egyptian dynasty. He was somewhere 1,800 years BC. But according to some scholars, and I am one of those scholars, we are saying that actually Herodotus is writing for Ramses II, who actually at that time was the time of the transformation from the Bronze to Iron Age, and Egypt is the most powerful power in East Mediterranean at that time. They need to import iron and gold in Egypt, because in Egypt you can't find natural iron, some meteoric iron maybe, but not natural. For that reason, actually Herodotus wrote about this Pharaoh Sesostrit, who actually colonized. He's talking about colonization.
Another remark made by Herodotus reads, quote, "In Macedonia, the ancient Phoenicians were exploiting the gold from the mines, which melted in a special furnace before the arrival of the Egyptian colonists in Hellas." In the same 2001 study on ethnogenesis, the authors state, quote, "From this text, we should conclude that in the 5th century BC, in Herodotus' time, in Greece the metal and mine workers were Egyptian colonists." There are holes in this ancient history. Few modern historians believe Sesostris existed, but understand him as a corruption of several pharaohs. Senestret's reign would have been in the 19th century BC. If we push that date forward, we have some compelling evidence presented in Martin Bernal's Black Athena.
Also, we have parallelly, not parallelly, but independently, it was with the other aim, of course. It was the research of Martin Bernal from the Cornell University, with his team of more than 200 scholars, that he also gave us a lot of evidences and proof about the colonization of the people from the Egypt and from the Middle East, Levant coast to the Balkans, in his very famous tetralogy study, Black Athens.
In 1987, with the publication of Black Athena, Professor Martin Bernal challenged the academic establishment.
Okay, let's take a call from South Carolina. For the people, you're on the air.
Good afternoon. My question is the following.
Bernal claimed that during the last 200 years, scholars rewrote the history books, denying that ancient Greece had roots in Africa and Asia. The myth they created of a pure white, unsullied dawn of Western civilization was a result of both anti-Semitism and racism. And he argues it still influences the perception the West has of itself today.
Moving on to the ancient history of the Balkan Egyptians, Professor Zeman asserts that Greek allegory explains their beginnings through the story of Cadmus, a Phoenician prince. These legends also demonstrate a point that both Bernal and the professor continually hammer home, that the people of ancient Hellas conceptualized their own culture as fundamentally African, emerging from Phoenician settlements. Cadmus was the son of the king of Tyre, now in Lebanon. Zeus carried away Europa, his sister, and the king of Phoenicia ordered Cadmus to bring her back home. When he failed in his quest, he consulted the oracle, who told him to settle far away in the land of cows. That land would become Thebes. There he found the Spring of Ares, the god of war, which was guarded by a dragon. Realizing his new quest, Cadmus killed the dragon, and Athena gave him half the monster's teeth with instructions on how to properly sew them. From these teeth sprang a race of warriors, the Spartoi, or sewn men. First among these was Echion, the wisest. He would marry Agave, daughter of Cadmus, and have a son named Penthus, who later became the king of Thebes. According to Bibliotheca, Cadmus was forced to serve as a slave for the god of war for 8 years, a punishment for slaying the dragon, after which Ares gave him his daughter, Harmonia. Their wedding, attended by the gods, was held at Thebes. There, Hephaestus, the god of the blacksmiths, presented Harmonia with a necklace that brought misfortune to whoever wore it. Bibliotheca records their youngest son as Illyrus, the progenitor of the Illyrian people and their first king. Misfortune befell the family because of the necklace and the slaying of the sacred dragon, and eventually Cadmus gave the throne to Penthus, the son of the wisest of the Spartoi. Cadmus and Harmonia then left to Illyria with some of their family, their patriarch always troubled by their misfortunes. Realizing the gods were upset over the killing of their dragon, he cried out that if they were so enamored with serpents, they may as well make him one. They obliged, and seeing her husband's fate, Harmonia begged them to let her share in his end, which they did. There is so much to understand from this legend. Not only was the royal bloodline of Thebes started by a Phoenician prince, but his grandmother was Africa on his father's side, and his maternal grandfather was the river Nile. Their youngest son would found the first Illyrian dynasty, to which modern Albanians trace their origins, and Epirus, the daughter of the warrior Cadmus gave the throne of Thebes, would die in the wilderness, giving it the name Epirus, a name which continues to be used. They all traced their origins back to Africa, and their misfortune began the moment the blacksmith god presented Cadmus's wife with a necklace traditionally said to be of beautifully worked gold. Not only does this give allegorical meaning to the origins of the countries of the ancient Balkans, but the story of the necklace of Harmonia explains the plight of the Balkan Egyptians, wandering into the wilderness in search of gold as skilled artisans, only to be stuck there after successive migrations over the centuries, losing their native tongue and even their sense of identity, facing increased discrimination, all because of a gift by the blacksmith of the gods of Olympia. Ancient Greeks clearly viewed themselves not as European at heart, but as Phoenician by birth and African by blood, founded by a man who desperately sought out his sister Europa, consistently failing even after slaying the dragon. These legends are so multifaceted, so fascinating from so many different angles, and ought to be appreciated through the context it gives the Balkan Egyptians.
The new account of ancient Greece's formative history started life in the latter part of the 18th century. Bernal describes it as the Aryan model. It stated that Aryan European peoples descended from the north and conquered the local native population in the Aegean. The resulting fusion gave birth to the Greek miracle. It ruled out any influences from dark-skinned Egyptians in the south or Semitic Phoenicians from the east.
Now, this was not the way in which the ancient or classical Greeks themselves saw their distant past. According to them, they had been living as in idyllic simplicity as tribes around the Aegean, and along had come Egyptians and Phoenicians, and they had set up colonies in Greece, built cities, and introduced the arts of civilization.
Many historians question Bernal's conclusions, but it is important to show that researchers can independently arrive at the same conclusions the Balkan Egyptians themselves understood. In fact, Martin Bernal consulted Ruben Zeman, a leader of the Balkan Egyptians in Yugoslavia at this time. Bernal's main theory is that Hellenistic Romanticism emerged only in the late 18th century. Prior to this, their culture was understood to have emerged at a crossroads of East and West. To justify the subjugation of Africa and the Middle East, Bernal argues that scholars of the day began to push the so-called Aryan model, the idea that a burst of creativity resulted in the founding of Athens and was due to an influx of northern Europeans conquering and mixing with the Aegean natives.
Martin Bernal is giving a very brave one theory about the Aryan model of the history. He is saying that before the 17th, 18th, 19th century, it was existing in among the people, so-called ancient model about the classical philosophy or history and so on. But with the theory of colonialism that appeared in the 18th century or 19th century, it was established a so-called Aryan model that was thrown out the ancient model, and he is proposing now a new revised actually ancient model of the history. So as I mentioned, the ancient model is saying that it was normally for the people, if we read a lot of works, poems, I don't know, philosophy from the period before 17th century in Europe, we will see it was very normal and ordinary to discuss about Egyptians and Jewish or Phoenicians existing in Europe or in the Balkan. But after establishment of this Aryan model, it was thrown out actually and was from the collective memory, and the books were actually wrote that only the European people are the head of civilization, and they from the white people is actually everything existing in a war with the history.
What do you think caused that change? To justify colonialism?
That's right, yeah. It was justifying the colonialism and national romanticism.
European historians were hoping to justify their actions by robbing ancient Greece of any Phoenician or Egyptian influence, as if to say that European culture could not possibly have roots in African or Semitic civilization.
In ancient time here in the Balkans, we have a great number of temples of Isis, because some of the scholars are saying it's only import from the soldiers who came with Alexander or the Roman and so on. But if you have a temple, you must have community. From other side, when we mention again the Olympia and her behavior after her night with Nephtanah, she also changed her behavior, and people are saying, Plutarch is saying that actually Olympia started to believe to Isis, and also Cleopatra, when she was suicided, her cult was actually the Isis, and she suicided with cobra, with the snake. What has happened actually? All these temples that were present in the Balkans during this period, ancient period, were destroyed by Octavian August because of Cleopatra. And he gave the order that in all temples of Isis to be destroyed and the statues of Isis to be cut at the head. And
I've noticed most of them are missing their heads.
Yeah, actually today all the statues of Isis are without head. So it's an Octavian August section. We don't have, exactly the order of Octavian. Probably it was an oral order. But after the Octavian, all the temples of Isis were destroyed. Even if you go in today in Stobi, is the biggest temple today in Macedonia, and the statue, you will see Isis with the big torsos but without head.
Professor Zeman recommends anybody interested in Balkan Egyptian history to visit the Temple of Isis in Stobi. An inscription was found in 1977 at the ruins of the Roman provincial capital mentioning this temple, but it wasn't until 2008 that the actual site was excavated. These digs continued until 2012, when a beautiful statue of the Egyptian goddess Isis was discovered. Isis as an Egyptian goddess was first mentioned over 4 millennia ago in the Old Kingdom central to the Osiris myth. Her cult spread around the Greco-Roman world, where she was paired with Serapis, a syncretic god created to unify the Ptolemaic kingdom. At this temple, Isis was worshipped right alongside Serapis, an amalgamation of 2 Egyptian gods, Osiris, the husband of Isis, and Apis, a sacred bull said to be the son of Hathor. It is no coincidence that Serapis was a union between the bull and Isis, promoted by Alexander the Great's successor in Egypt, Ptolemy Soter. The intent was to unify the Greeks in the land of cows to the Egyptians in the land of Isis. See the myth of Cadmus and his desire to settle where the cows were, in Thebes.
Several important sites point to links between the Balkans and ancient Egyptian culture. Stovi, a significant ancient city with artifacts showing cultural exchanges. Trebuchet Mosque, golden funeral mosque from Trebuchet. Reminiscent of Egyptian burial traditions.
You wrote in 1999 that the Cadmus legend should be contextualized with the tombs in the Trebuchet metropolis. Can you tell me a little bit more about why the necropolis sort of corresponds to Egyptian sites?
So the ceremony of putting the mask of the king or who was there, it's actually very similar to what we have in Egypt with Tutankhamun, what we have in Mykenæ with Agamemnon, and what we have in Trebuchet. That was the line, actually. And again, we can, if we see the legend of Cadmus, there are indications of the colonizations of the people. So that is actually what Pascal Kuzman, not me, but Pascal Kuzman, archaeologist, making such kind of improvisation, reconstruction of the traces, how the colonies went.
You mentioned a Croatian Egyptologist who believed that Egyptians who settled around the Croatian islands didn't assimilate.
It's Petar Selem, the very Petar Selem from Split, very famous Croatia, very famous Egyptologist. He wrote that during the Roman Empire, actually his dissertation is named Egyptian cults in a Roman Illyricus. And he wrote that, for example, in Salona or Solina, near to Split also today, or in other islands, are indicated existing of the Egyptian small communities that were taken with their traditional crafts.
So on the topic of metalsmithing, you say that blacksmithing and living in non-nomadic settlements is kind of a telltale sign of an Egyptian community.
Yes, traditionally, for example, my grandfather was a blacksmith, and generally the blacksmith crafts, it was one of the pillars of the existence of this community. Why is a blacksmith? Probably because, as we mentioned, the reason for colonization was exploitation of the iron. But from other side, we have to be aware that maybe when you're talking about Egyptians, we are not talking about only the ethnic identity from in the ancient time or time of Ramses II. Maybe we can talking about the slaves that were slaved by the pharaohs, and there are different communities with Egyptian identity as a, citizen identity, not ethnic identity.
Dusko Doder, again writing in 95, notes that some Balkan Egyptians believe themselves the offspring of Alexander the Great's army. According to this telling, Alexander of Macedon journeyed to Egypt around 325 BCE, finding their civilization in decline. He journeyed to the oasis of Siwa, consulting with the oracle. The Egyptians then recognized him as the son of Amun. Many Egyptian conscripts were blacksmiths and miners. When Alexander died, some Balkan Egyptians believed that a group of loyal followers returned to his homeland in Macedon. Rich mineral deposits drew them into the northern hinterlands, where they mingled with the Illyrians, learning their language, adopting their religion, but retaining some unique identity and folklore. And Robertina, Professor Zemon's sister, actually wrote this, "The children of Ammon." Naysayers argue that modern claims of Egyptian descent only began recently, but this simply isn't so. In 1867, a letter was sent to the Bulgarian newspaper Macedonia, printed in Istanbul. In the waning days of the Ottoman Empire, nationalist movements could be found in every corner of Balkan society. They reached their peak in the mid-19th century. One of the first modern self-identifying Egyptians was an author writing the editor under the pseudonym one Egyptian from Prilep, a town, now in northern Macedonia. Some background. At the time, Prilep was in the Ottoman Empire, and Balkan authorities would occasionally draw a distinction between the Roma and Kipti, or Copts, a word for Egyptians.
During the Ottoman Empire, actually the Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, he brought two different laws. One, it was Kanuname, I don't know on the Turkish now, maybe I have to read somewhere the document.
The Code of the Egyptians of the Vilayet of Rumelia?
Of Rumelia, for Kiptiane, and the second one is for Chingene. Chingene is meaning for the Roma, Tsigans, and Kiptiane is for the Egyptian. Even when we read the canons, there is not, any special norms about that. It's only the title. And generally, they are talking about wandering people inside of the canons.
One Egyptian from Prilep laments the leadership of the Greek Orthodox Church, claiming they lived in the Fanar area of Istanbul and arguing that they corruptly lead the church only in the interest of the Greeks. Not only do the Greek Orthodox elites have negative impact on the church, one Egyptian claims, but they suppress national movements of other nations like Bulgaria who have no religious independence whatsoever. Even worse, he claims Egyptians like himself are shunned from Orthodox Church, suspected of being barbarians or semi-Christians. The Egyptian argued that Christianity doesn't divide nations into pleasing and unpleasant, but sees them all as equal before God. The author is brave for what he writes, stating that Greeks view themselves as pleasant to God and all others as suspicious or unworthy, and further argues, quote, "The apostles speak all languages through the Holy Ghost, and not only the Hellenic." He even says that the Greeks were, quote, "grazing grass" when the educated Egyptians arrived to teach them the ways of civilization. Because the Roma were recognized and afforded minority rights under the Ottoman banner, the author appreciates them, but firmly states that the Egyptians are separate and rails against the prospect of the Greeks controlling their religious lives. The author was proven to be a local barber named Ilya Naumchev, whose business hosted an Egyptian club. By night, they would meet to discuss their ethnicity, and he worked tirelessly to combat alcoholism and improve literacy in his own community. After years of hard work, he was accepted as a priest into the new Bulgarian Orthodox Church. Now this is the monastery of St. Archangel Michael in Prilep. Unfortunately, he never saw the creation of a Balkan Egyptian Orthodox Church or a Romani Orthodox Church. He's forgotten in his hometown, whose Romani-identifying inhabitants since converted to Islam or Protestantism. One modern author points out there are a number of independent evangelical churches serving the Balkan Egyptian community in the local area. A couple centuries before that, you wrote that Archbishop Theophylact wrote about areas governed by a pharaoh, and he said that he traveled through Egypt to go from Ohrid to Constantinople. Can you tell me a little about that?
Yes, from the letters of the Theophylact. He was the Archbishop of the Ohrid Church in 12th century. He wrote to his friend, I think that Archbishop of Kerkira, some letters where he mentioned it that in Ohrid it was one guy who is making the most of the problem. He was known as with the name Pharaoh. It's a time before the Roma came, and it's the time before the Aryan model.
So the Roma were 13th, 14th century.
14 later, 200 years later. Even maybe he was, religious man, church person. Maybe Egypt is association of something else. Maybe according to the legend of Moses and so on, is maybe he has some other associations, but he wrote this. And he mentioned that the road from Ohrid to Constantinople for him is like to going through Egypt. So,
and that would be the Via Egnatia, right?
Yes.
Orhan Demirovsky told me to visit Rezin, a town famous for their Balkan Egyptians. The Romans built the Via Egnatia through here in the 2nd century BC, and the settlement sprang up around it, midway between the lake and Bitola. Understanding the Via Egnatia is crucial to understanding not only the Balkan Egyptians, but also their blacksmithing culture. Egyptians settled along this road for convenience. In the 13th century, the Roma began to settle along the path, which had been maintained for travelers and caravans for many centuries. They claimed to be Egyptian, and in many cases settled in the outskirts of Balkan Egyptian villages. Much of the Via Egnatia is now buried or paved over, but this nice section shows the typical construction style on the western shore of Lake Ohrid. It's in the foothills of the mountains just outside of Rodosda. From here it continues northward along the western shore through Rezin. Timelines are very important here. When Theophylact remarked that he had to travel through Egypt, this was in reference to the Egnatian Way, or the Via Egnatia. The remark was made centuries before Romani people settled in the Balkans, so we couldn't have been talking about them. When Herodotus claimed that Egyptians worked as blacksmiths in the area, this was centuries before the road was even conceived. The Rezin Cemetery is south of town along Route E65, divided in two sections, Christians to the north and Muslims to the south. In the Christian section, 2 lions can be seen on the side of the church, an Egyptian symbol, according to Professor Ruben Zeman. The Muslim community of Rezin and around Lake Ohrid has been known for blacksmithing for centuries, and the town is populated with hundreds of Balkan Egyptians, according to Orhan Demirovsky. They have their own ceremonial banner, said to be 3 centuries old, brought out for very special occasions, like weddings. Struga, on the northern shore of the lake between Ohrid and Rodosda, has a huge population of similar blacksmiths. Orhan was kind enough to give me a list of blacksmithing families from Ohrid and Struga. Their names are presented here.
So you make all these?
Yes. Yes, make ramis here. This, all parts.
Those look very high quality. Those look like they came right out of a hardware store.
Today is hard to know which is your exactly cultures, but there are some things, especially on heritage and especially in occupations, which not everybody can do. For example, before I mentioned 2 jobs that still are connected with, let me say, traditionally with Egypt. For example, pottery, that is occupation of Egyptian communities, or the persons who can work with iron is still professions that belong to Egyptian communities.
At this point, an effort should be made to understand Romani nationalism. Well, when you were talking a little earlier about the Ashkali, is that divide linguistic divide? Just a different name? They were given a pejorative name?
Just a different name, because Ashkali and Egyptian communities, they don't have them languages different from each other. They speak, for example, in Kosovo, they speak Albanian. Ashkali and Egyptian communities. Especially in every part of the Balkan where they live, they speak the Mazarans languages. For example, if you go and find Egyptians in Macedonia, they speak Macedonian. But they don't have their own languages such have Roma communities. For example, one Roma, even in Germany, even in Turkey, even in everywhere in Balkan, they speak similar languages. They have them different dialect, but they have the same languages. But Ashkali and Egyptian communities, they don't have their own languages. Such, I mentioned the example between Roma.
During the mid-19th century, many activists were torn between supporting the Ottomans or supporting the national movements of whichever faction whose language they spoke, even though the very same group would often deprive the Roma of their citizenship and rights. Roma-adjacent communities like the Egyptians and Ashkali, although distinct, have always faced this dilemma. Very often they aided whichever group offered them more stability, even if it didn't necessarily match their best short-term goals. Discrimination faced in these communities is of an intensity unknown to almost any other ethnicity in Europe. And so we arrive in Yugoslavia in the early 1970s. By this point, most national movements had been consolidated and were satisfied with a federated framework of local political representation. The majority of self-identifying Egyptians in the southern Balkans spoke Tosk Albanian and declared themselves Albanian on the census, not as Roma. There was, after all, no ability to identify as Ashkali or Balkan Egyptian at that point. This was unusual for Albanians, who were at that time experiencing a sense of national revival. In 1974, this all changed. Yugoslavia adopted a new constitution, at the time the longest and most clearly defined in the entire world. This new document guaranteed the rights of minorities and, more importantly, allowed citizens to self-report any ethnicity they preferred. It drew a clear distinction between race, i.e., the social construct used to classify people based on physical appearance, and ethnicity, or one's own self-identification.
Before, let's say, 1980s, the Egyptians, because in Yugoslavia, because of the language, were registered as Albanians, because the Egyptians from Ohrid, Struga, they were resident, they speak Albanian language. And in 1970s, a lot of Egyptians, because they wanted to differ from Albania, because in Yugoslavia was one kind of language you speaking at home, what is your mother tongue, so you are belonging to that community. And because the Egyptians from this area, Struga, Ohrid, resident, they are speaking the Tosca dialect, they said, okay, we are Tosca in town, like Toscana in Italy, something similar. Tosca, And, but the declaration in the census was not publicly evident. So after the constitution changed in Yugoslavia in 1974, it was given a right to the people to declare themselves like they're feeling.
Kosovo's political status was also elucidated. A little over a decade before the Constitution of 1974, the Yugoslav Constitution elaborated on the nature of autonomy, suggesting constituent republics should, quote, found autonomous provinces in accordance with the Constitution in areas with distinctive national characteristics or in areas with other distinguishing features. The individual republics of Yugoslavia had their own representation, prime ministers and presidents. Within these republics you had autonomous territories like Kosovo, autonomous since 1945. From 1978 to 1982, even Stambolic was president of Serbia. Any decision reached by the Serb parliament could be annulled by the provincial assembly in Pristina as a rule. Up until this point, most were satisfied with remaining an autonomous province instead of a republic, and ideas of independence seemed far away. However, a very unique set of conditions arose in Kosovo that led to an insurgency. The Balkan Egyptians were caught up in the politics and fighting that would accelerate into outright war. This began in 1981 when Kosovo had one of the best universities in Yugoslavia. Education seemed an easy opportunity, but infrastructure was lacking, and there was a stagnant economy. Many chose to go to college, then returned to their farms with little hope for upward mobility. Protests at the university turned violent, and President Stambolic convinced the League of Communists of Yugoslavia to curtail the autonomy of territories like Kosovo. Political demands were initially only for autonomy. Professors and assemblymen called for the formation of a federative republic within Yugoslavia, but after Stambolic was deposed by Slobodan Milosevic, feelings began to turn sour. From 1989, Milosevic leveraged the Kosovo issue to win popular support, embarking on the anti-bureaucratic revolution. The overeducated, underemployed Albanians of Kosovo began to worry about ethnic tension when Kosovo's autonomy was reduced and Azem Vlasi, the president of the provincial committee, was fired. For the most part, Egyptians and Ashkali tried to remain neutral. In the Balkans, however, neutrality was totally intolerable. In 1990, they formed the Association of Egyptians in Yugoslavia, which was led by Nazmi Arifi. His son is Professor Ruben Zeman, and he's now buried in Ohrid. Speaking to the papers, he said of the situation, quote, "The Albanians hated us and accused us of pretending to be Albanian. However, the Egyptians of Yugoslavia consulted with the ambassador from Egypt, and for a while were trying to gain more recognition. Sadly, their efforts were overshadowed by a larger conflict looming in the Balkans." As the political crisis devolved into an insurgency, Egyptians and Ashkali found themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place. Serbian politicians looked down on them, and according to a 1995 article on the movement, Ratko Duric scoffed at the idea, insisting they were, quote, gentrified gypsies. This was the president of the World Gypsy Congress, insisting that they were, quote, simply Albanians.
Roma, Ashkali, and Egyptian communities as the three communities divided from each other, especially by recognizing of Constitution of Kosovo. We have a good life with each other. We have a good cooperation with each other. There is not anything that can stop our good relationships that we have. And of course, and unfortunately, we consider three of us as marginalization groups. Hope so one day we should be considered same with the society of Kosovo. Of course, these things cannot be right now because we need to see the political will of governments, how much they are interested and have will to develop the three communities. Some affirmative political issues that it was created from the government of Kosovo from 2007-8. They try to have the special focus on these three communities, how to develop them from the different programs, especially in education and another sectors such as economy or housing or many problems that communities are facing. But still now I didn't see any big effect to give them the best development how we waited from the government. But I need to say some good words, especially in educations, because if we compare the situations 20 years before, for example, in secondary school, from the Roma, Ashkali, and Egyptian communities, you can account maybe 5 or 6 children per municipality. And today they are 400 or 500% more, which means that not only integration but the awareness of the communities is a little bit more up because the government try to support them with a different scholarship, which it was really important and necessary for that youngers. And today we are lucky to say, and I'm happy to say that from that period that we had 5 or 6 persons 20 years before, today we have 3 candidates who are part of different university who are trying to study on PhD. So it means one big success that it was made it till now. But of course there are some issues that government didn't give too much support, such as infrastructures where the Roma, Ashkali, and Egyptians live, such as employing. So it means that by communities we are good, but by the supporting of the government, I think we are not in that level that we was waiting 20 years before.
National identity in the Balkans can be a very strange thing. After the insurgency, the international administration in Kosovo stressed the importance of the ability to self-identify on the census. Over 30,000 Roma, Ashkali, and Egyptians were forced to flee during the war, returning only by trickles. Many of them faced the discrimination of their neighbors for identifying as Egyptian in the first place. In spite of a guarantee of representation, their infrastructure in Kosovo is still very much lacking. More recent assessment from Egyptian activist Professor Zeman are optimistic. According to him, Egyptians in Kosovo have more representation than anywhere else in the Balkans. The constitution recognizes them as a minority, and they have a number of vibrant and diverse NGOs and activists. In 2014, Beton Berisha established his own group, the Egyptian Liberal Party. They now have 1 member in parliament, 2 deputy ministers, and 1 advisor to the prime minister. So if Americans wanted to learn more about Egyptian culture here, You were saying that they have a yearly musical. They sing once a year.
Yes, we have in our activity, in the program of association, every year we have an event. Name of the event is Sound of Egypt. Participating 1,000 people every year. I sent you invite to go on the November and enjoy our traditions and cultural dances and music songs.
Very cool. Is that every November? Every year?
Every November.
I will send you one of my work that we make this kind of associations between the drums in Africa and drums here, and the cult of the drum.
I focus on social activism, advocating for the rights, education and employment opportunities of the community of Egyptians on Ohrid. The football club and cultural ensemble serve as unifying forces bringing people through sports and traditional music, strengthening identity and fostering social inclusion. For official book for football in the Ohrid. In 1921.
And this is the original football team, Pyramida,
Yes.
founded in 1995?
Yes. In Ohrid. This is first president, and this is football team.
What would you say the state is of the Egyptian national consciousness in the Balkans today? How many people really embrace that identity?
Good question. I think that only the minority of the people with Egyptian origins have the national consciousness that belonging to the Egyptian community. Because of the educational system. In educational system in the Balkan states, you don't have any information about the history of Egyptian and existence of the Balkan Egyptian community.
The community of Ohrid. We have 1 and 2nd.
So the community council?
Yes. 8 years we have council on our community on Ohrid. This is the center of Ohrid, and in this area lives the Egyptians.
Okay, this is
But in Macedonia and Albanian and Turkish people, but the most is Egypt people.
So the majority of people here are Egyptians?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
This mosque near the center of Ohrid is promoted for the Egyptian community that lives here. So this is Gocha Delta, and along this street live many Egyptians. This is most Egyptians, and up here is the blacksmith shop. Here.
How much of Shiro? Yeah, here is for Macedonia and Serbia.
Okay.
Yes, here and this one.
Behind me now is the Shogun Barber Shop, and I just spoke to the barber in there. He's a fascinating man. He's the first barber in his family, but prior to that, this was a blacksmith shop, and it's in the old part of the center of Ohrid where many Egyptians actually live. And if you come here to see the Egyptian culture, you really should see the shop.
And this is an Egyptian-owned bike store run by Mr. Ramiz on the edge of the old town. This street actually leads down to the barber shop we were just at, so if you come here, feel free to drop in.
Mr. Rami.
Oh, the owner of the store.
Younger.
Stavite duši bi motora.
1975 is this.
Where was
Motor,
this?
Yes.
In the mountains?
Yes, in the mountains.
Modeli pare će kako pa para jeste 5
Da. Here, Sean.
Here.
So that's 30 years old.
Yes.
Is that the one he has the patent on?
Yes.
So what's so unique about it? The patent is for the layout of the steel,
Yes.
I would guess. Wow.
Me as a landlord, I don't have any second country such have a different communities in Kosovo. For example, by joke I said Albanian have Albania, Serbian have Serbia, but I cannot go in Egypt, or Roma people cannot go in India, or Ashkali communities cannot go in Iran. So this is our country. We want to live together. We want to have a good cooperation with everyone who live here, and of course to be integrated with Kosovo society, to feel equal with each one, and I don't know, to be progressive every day.